It's been a very interesting period that we face. As I've indicated, Pontius Machila and I were the first two black attorneys. He started the year before, when the uprising started in 1976. He started practice there. And then I joined him in 1977, and we were really brothers. I mean, we helped each other because, you know, at that time when we started practice in Rustenburg, two things that I could recollect. If you were an attorney, a black attorney, you could not sit on the chair in the prosecutor's office. You had to stand, discuss your business, and go. When they adjourned for tea, the whites are allowed to go for tea, but Pontius Machila and I were not invited.
In Conversation With is proudly sponsored by Africa Cash and Carry, Crown Mines, and shot on location at Kurtuba Convention Center.
In Conversation with CII, today we're in conversation with Enver Surty, previously Deputy Minister of Basic Education, Minister of Justice, one of the most senior South African Muslim leaders to serve in the ANC. Enver Surty, Jazakallah khair for honoring our invite and joining us today.
Shukran, thank you very much for inviting me, and Assalamu alaikum.
What is your journey into the ANC?
My journey to the ANC?
A journey to the ANC.
Well, you know, my journey started seriously after the unbanning of the African National Congress. At the time, I was practicing law, and
that's quite late.
Yes, I'm talking about my serious.
Okay.
Started seriously with the ANC. I have not been in exile, nor have I been incarcerated prior to the release of Nelson Mandela. But upon the release of Nelson Mandela, and with the unbanning of the African National Congress, and being a lawyer, it meant that I would have to represent many of our comrades who were arrested, represent the African National Congress, act for the National Union of Mine Workers, COSATU in general, and deal with political cases. We were only two black attorneys at the time in Rustenburg, Pontius Machila, who is now late, and myself. And we were the obvious choices in terms of representation. I had no political ambitions, and obviously joined the African National Congress.
You had no political ambitions?
I had absolutely none, because I had a very good, flourishing practice, alhamdulillah, and there was no need to go to seek something else, but there was a realization that so many people have done so much for us. People who were incarcerated, people who were in exile, people who had lost their lives. And when you have an opportunity to contribute to positive change and to serve your country and those who have been oppressed, then you can't turn your back on it. So the work that we did at the time was really work that came from the bottom of our hearts, and we served. We almost neglected our professional responsibilities and were really sucked into the political arena in terms of its legal landscape.
That's a very interesting starting point, because many or most people who we interview, we speak to, the start of their journey, whether their journey really started, you know, but we believe them, starts in 1976, it starts in the 80s, and there's like an emotional connection. We were at school then it started, etc. And they start their journey from there. Were you an activist before this?
Obviously, I was at university, and we were I started university in 1971, and in the next year, you know, we had our first boycott in solidarity with the expulsion of Tiro at the University of the North. And that was really an eye-opener. I was probably 18 years old at the time, and Zak Yaqub, Pravin Gordon, Krish Naidu were all activists at the time with us, and we were influenced. And that had a huge impact on who we are, because we had taken the decision at that time already that we would recognize the institution only as a tribal institution. It does not represent an autonomous university. We would not have a student representative council. We would not utilize any of the amenities other than those for our education. So I loved sport. I played cricket, I played soccer, and you had to abandon all those wonderful opportunities for a principle. So that discipline.
What was the principle?
The principle was non-collaboration. I mean, firstly to say that we cannot be in an institution and pretend that it's an autonomous and credible institution of learning when it excludes other race groups. And until such time that our universities are open to all races, we're certainly not going to give it credence and credibility by having a student representative council. So by and large, that's what we did. I graduated twice. I did a BA and an honors degree. I did not go for the graduation ceremony because we did not recognize the institution. Similarly, when I got my legal degree, I did not go to UNISA to receive my degree because it was racist and an institution of learning. So those are principles that remained with us. So when we started practice, that commitment was there. So I would not serve and I would not encourage, in fact, I would dissuade people from serving in the management committees at the time because they are collaborative forces. So that political principle and that kind of mild activism was with us. So nobody could ever suggest that I will serve in any of the structures of the regime. In fact, I oppose it all the time. The tricameral parliament, we did what most of our brothers and sisters had done, is oppose it and dissuade people from voting. I think in Rustenburg, there probably were 5 people that voted in the entire community because we had a measure of influence on the community. When we were at school, my wife was a teacher at school at the time, and well, she's from Durban, and we were at university together. And interesting things happened because we had just in conversation, you indicated whom you married to. Our young girls did not go to university, and here they see somebody who studied locally, who was dressed in very decent attire, who's now teaching English to the matriculants, was very young, and somehow the community accepted that you can be a woman who seeks education and can contribute to the development. After that, so many of our learners from Rustenburg went to university, became lawyers, became doctors, became architects, and it's the result of that platform that you set up to say that education is important. And in case people might jump up and say, but what about Islamic education? My children went to madrasa up to matric, So it's a combination of the two, and they were complementary. So in a way, we tried very hard to instill a belief in a non-racial society. So what I share with you now is something that you could check with the community in Rustenburg. I'll give you some good examples, and one of the persons who really influenced me in a very significant way is the late Rashid Patel. He's a second cousin of mine. His mother and my father were first cousins. Highly intelligent. He was the chairperson of the Rustenburg Muslim Jamaat. And we always spoke about and looked at the broader community. Not the community of Zinjaville where we were forced to live in terms of the Group Areas Act. And there was a full commitment to non-racialism. So he had established the Rustenburg Youth Organization, and all our sport was non-racial. So we had African children playing with Indian children, and it was very, very integrated. So the Rustenburg Youth Organization had a constitution at that time, and I'm talking about the 60s, which spoke about non-racialism.
Very progressive.
Very, very progressive.
And
Yes.
progressive in terms of time.
Oh yeah, in terms of time.
Well,
and people basically, their political journey, some of them starts only after 1990. I think I was started considerably earlier. So I started practice in Rustenburg in 1977, and I had to wait for about 5-6 years before my daughter got into school, and I could then serve in the governing body. And it's the only institution I served in was the educational institution. And the very first decision we took, and that would have been 1977, 1982, 1983, is that the school's doors of learning will be open to everybody. That's going to be non-racial. And what we did at the time, and I say we because it's not only me, we had a principal called Umar Farooq Mutara, a very dynamic, progressive person. He's late now. He contributed very significantly to the education and well-being of our learners. We took the decision, and then we had Muslim children, African Muslim children, and non-Muslim African children. And we gave them Indian names. And they started school with our children. So my oldest child started school with African children in a class in the early 80s, and every one of my children went to school with African children in the class. 1994 came long thereafter. Our school was already integrated. Our principle of non-racialism was so strong at the time that a swimming pool, the public swimming pool, our learners were not allowed to use it unless and until coloreds and African children were allowed to use it. So during school hours, they were not allowed to use that facility for swimming because it excluded other racial groups. The library was open only for Indians only on a Wednesday. We declined, we certainly told our children, you cannot utilize this library. It's racist, and our children would travel as far as Johannesburg to use the library on the basis of a commitment to non-racialism. So when our democracy dawned on us, our school was already integrated. As I've indicated, already in the early 80s, African children were in our schools. Our hostel in the 80s was already integrated. There were African children in our hostel. So that commitment to non-racialism wasn't an ANC commitment, but it was a commitment to the values of the African National Congress. And I certainly identify with that, and those form part of our founding provisions of our constitution in non-racial, non-sexist, united and democratic South Africa. So our life experiences certainly had an influence in our thinking and our attitude and the values that we had as cadres of the African National Congress. But the lesson perhaps is this, that you cannot, because of your academic qualifications, because of your intellectual competence, suggest that you are entitled to represent an organization without being a member of the branch, without contributing meaningfully to your own immediate community and the broader community. There must be a footprint in the community of contribution. And one of the things that we had learned at a very young age, and I was probably 22 when I started practice, very young, but I was already actively involved, and I say because of the influence of people like Rashid Patel, Dr. Shaukat Ali Token, who was a very progressive and forward-looking visionary thinker, is that we've got to be part and parcel of the community in terms of our role and in terms of the leadership. So already in the 20s, we were assuming a leadership role in our community. I was chairperson of the school governing body. My cousin, Rashid Patel, was the chairperson of Jamaat, probably the youngest chairperson of the Rustenburg Muslim Jamaat. He died at a young age, tender age of about 35. But we didn't shirk off that responsibility. We were part of it, and we played sport, and we lived like everybody else. But there were some principled things that we took, decisions that we took. And the community, I must say, is a wonderful community. They never challenged it. They never argued against it. So when we said our school is non-racial, nobody ever raised their hands to say, why are African children in our schools? Or why are African children in our hostels? But it's also part of your deen. So when you go to mosque, you stand shoulder to shoulder. It doesn't matter who's standing next to you. It could be white, it could be colored, it could be African. And you do so without any reservation. So that has to be transferred in your other institutions of learning, in the social interaction that we have in the community. So it's consistent with our Islamic belief, and maybe at times I think communities tend to forget about that particular reality. So it's been a very interesting period that we face. As I've indicated, Pontius Machila and I were the first two black attorneys. He started the year before, when the uprising started in 1976. He started practice there. And then I joined him in 1977, and we were really brothers. So, I mean, we helped each other because, you know, at that time when we started practice in Rustenburg, two things that I could recollect. If you were an attorney, a black attorney, you could not sit on the chair in the prosecutor's office. You had to stand, discuss your business, and go. When they adjourned for tea, the whites are allowed to go for tea, but Pontius Machila and I were not invited to go for tea. The cases, and in fact my very first case, and I remember it so clearly, you know, and although I speak Afrikaans very, very fluently, was hierdie hof praat nie Afrikaans nie. Engels nie. Hierdie hof praat nie Engels nie. This court doesn't speak English. And I was shocked. I was nervous. I couldn't believe it because I'd been to Durban. I had to be in Johannesburg where I served my articles. And now I come back to Rustenburg, come back to my hometown, and I'm told, listen, you can't speak in English. Obviously, when it had arisen a second time, I told the court, I have a constitutional right. It's my staatsrecht. And if the court objects to it, please place in record that you are unwilling to allow me my right to exercise my constitutional right. So that was perhaps my inroad to constitutionalism. And the court says, "Gaan maar aan," and Engels. And I did so. And quite the hilarious part about this is I was representing a Tswana-speaking African person. And I continued with my case in English. And at the end of the state's evidence, my guy was to give evidence. So the magistrate says to the he's speaking in Setswana. So he tells the interpreter, you can go. So I asked him, with whose permission are you sending the interpreter away? He says, but you said that your client prefers English above Afrikaans. I said, that's correct, Your Worship. But he prefers Setswana, his mother tongue, above English. And he says, "Kom maar terug, come back." And the guy came back, and in the reality, and fortunately enough, they weren't able to prove the case. He was a good witness, and I got an acquittal. But that very same magistrate, whom everybody feared, had a degree of respect. Because 2 days after that, just 2 days after that, I had a dealing in Dagga case. Now, dealing in Dagga at that time is if you had more than 115 grams of Dagga in your possession, you are deemed to be a seller. And the minimum sentence is 5 years. Now, that's where you've got to really work for the guys. Because, if 5 years for a person who's earning a living, who has to support family, for having just 115 grams of Dagga, and they work in the mines, they go deep in the bowels of the earth to extract platinum for us, And I had this case, a marathon case, and the same magistrate, so I did it in Afrikaans, by the way. I did it in Afrikaans because I'm reasonably fluent in Afrikaans. He didn't ask me to do so, but I did in Afrikaans. And as I was cross-examining, it was a trap. In Afrikaans, they call it a lokval, where you have your money, the notice marked, and they're going by with that there. So instead of saying noot, I said nota. Nota is a musical note.
Nota, okay.
So the same magistrate who basically was impatient with me, sends a note to me, "Meneer Surty, dis noot nie nota nie." So when we adjourned, I went to him and I said, "Thank you so much for the courtesy of drawing my attention to it." Cross-examined the guy. At the end of the day, he tells the guy to stand up and he says, "You must thank your lawyer. You are now found not guilty and discharged." And that was the relationship that we had built. As a result, it started off with a hostile relationship and became a very, very friendly relationship. To the extent that when I was in his court, and if the prosecutor didn't call up my case, he says, "Hoekom moet meneer Surty so lang wag?" So, and it was just because of language, by the way. Because I was so fluent, I started reading my law reports in Afrikaans, and I didn't realize at that time that it would make such a huge impact in the work that I was going to do for the African National Congress as a negotiator for the Bill of Rights. Because the National Party was mainly Afrikaans speaking. And you basically communicated with them in Afrikaans and they were comfortable. So we didn't have to vote on a single clause. We achieved consensus throughout. And by and large, as a result of the interaction that I've had with them in Afrikaans. Obviously, there are other elements, but that was it. So Afrikaans, in a sense, language of the oppressor, helped our organization, helped our country in many ways in terms of achieving the goodwill. But Mandela says, when you speak in the language that mother tongue, you speak to the heart, not to the head.
They said it. In 1994, you mentioned a little bit of what you did in terms of the Bill of Rights. But pre-1994, there was a lot of fear in the country. There was a lot of fear amongst I won't use the word conservative Muslims, but
In everybody, even in the Indian community. I mean, people were saying you must start storing groceries and there's going to be bloodshed and so forth. Well, there was a potential risk of bloodshed. There's no doubt about it. And especially after the murder of Chris Hani, when Madiba showed his wonderful statesmanship by saying what he did and addressing the nation in the manner that he did. But it was very tense at that time. People were anxious and people were afraid. Some of us believed that change would come. And we were indeed happy and delighted that it's coming sooner than we expected, quite honestly.
You're not the first person who made this comment, that it came sooner than expected. What was happening in the 80s into the late 80s, early 90s that made people, that gave you the feeling that this thing might be drawn out?
Yeah, because of the power of the police and the defense force, because of the strong intelligence forces, because of the laws of incarceration, people being detained incommunicado. Much of what you see in Palestine, obviously the degrees, ours was much lesser than what is being experienced by our brothers and sisters in Palestine. But they call it administrative detention. Ours was under the emergency laws of emergency, and we were kept incommunicado, where you can't basically meet your family, and you were kept indefinitely, as occurs in Israel right now, and that really made things difficult. Your political organizations, the ANC was banned. You couldn't quote anybody from the African National Congress. So your space. You had no freedom as such, freedom of expression, freedom of movement, freedom of association. It was terrible. It was very, very hard. And given the strength of the police and the intelligence itself, one thought that it would take a little longer than it did. I think the release of Nelson Mandela was a wonderful boon to the nation. And
how close to that event were you? The release of Nelson Mandela, what was happening behind the scenes?
I was not. People would ask me about that, and quite honestly, I was not involved in the interim constitution at all.
Okay.
Notwithstanding the fact, I was quite far removed because we were in Rustenburg, a klein dorpie over there.
Okay.
So politically conscious, politically aware, politically consistent with what the ANC should do, long before the release of Nelson Mandela and the unbanning of the African National Congress. Obviously, we knew what the ANC was and what we stood for, and they were our heroes and heroines.
Why did you choose the ANC? You sound, and you are, someone of considerable intellect and
well, because of what
and there were many other options. There's the PAC.
Yes, there were. I'm aware of all the organizations that were there. The African National Congress.
Why did so many Muslim people actually go to the ANC?
Look, let's put it that way. The ANC was in the motive force. And when Nelson Mandela was released and Nelson Mandela was ANC, you had the popular appeal for the African National Congress, and certainly it had a much more pervasive presence compared to the other political organizations like AZAPO, etc. So the ANC was stronger even in exile than the other political parties.
Your assessment of IFP, you studied in KZN.
Oh God, IFP, we certainly, late Dr. Buthelezi, may his soul rest in peace. He wasn't popular with us when we were at university because we regarded him as a sellout and a collaborator. And there's no question about that, Although,
is that still the opinion?
Well, I had a good relationship with him.
The jury is still out on it, even on his passing in media. The debate, he passed away.
There's no question about the fact that he collaborated with the system. There's no question about it.
Okay.
Notwithstanding the fact that he may have contributed positively. But one cannot forget, even at the threshold and the cusp of our democracy, his party was one of the few with Mangope that refused to participate in the democratic elections. That they wanted an independent homeland, that they resisted a government of national unity. So one can't forget those realities. And irrespective of how he would say he was part of the Youth League of the African National Congress, he was in good terms with the African National Congress, he consorted with the leaders of the African National Congress.
There's a contentious opinion. I know we're debating about people who passed away, but I think understanding some of these principles, at least your opinion, might shed some light on what we can do in the future. Apartheid is a situation, and there are role players responding to the situation. the African National Congress, ZAPU, PAC, and this Mangosuthu Buthelezi and Mangope, etc. And this is their response. Their response is, you call it collaboration. They are saying, I listened to Mangosuthu Buthelezi's speeches and discussions when he was in the USA and speaking about these issues. If you look at it now and say, well, this was their response, and they have the justifications to their response relating
Look,
to...
it's a narrow...
And Nikata's also, for the lack of a better, maybe a more nationalist a movement geographically and ethically as it was.
It was very ethnic.
Yes,
it was ethnic. It represented the Zulu interest. It was narrow and parochial, yes. But basically the ANC spoke against ethnicity in any form and shape. It says that we've got to overcome the demon of ethnicity and racism. So it didn't only speak about racism, it even spoke about ethnicity, because if it did not do so, it would matter very much if you said Tswana or you said Zulu or you said Xhosa. It would matter. But because it was able to overcome these ethnic divisions, it was able to...
Do you believe the ANC has overcome it? I know we're jumping now to 2024.
I really believe, I know we're jumping, but I can understand the haste in trying to get where you want to get to. We look, especially I would say in the beginning, and this is why I love the African National Congress, and perhaps maybe use it anecdotally, because I know you want to know more, you're going to ask me more questions about myself. Amongst the many things, and I was privileged to be given the role by the African National Congress, the role in many, as a provincial whip, as a negotiator of the Bill of Rights, as a chief whip. And as a chief whip, you have huge authority. You can determine when a minister comes in, how long he or she is going to speak for, where the minister is going to speak at what time. You basically manage politically Parliament. And your link is basically with two people: the leader of government business, who's usually the deputy president. In my time, it was Jacob Zuma, and the Secretary General of the African National Congress was Kgalema Motlanthe, with whom I worked when I was Minister of Justice, and he was the president of our country. And in that 5 years, you chair caucus, co-chair caucus with the chief whip of the National Assembly, who was Tony Yengeni at the time. And you engage with the entire body of the African National Congress. There wasn't one single day where my authority was questioned on the basis of my race, or where I was disrespected, where people showed any form of disrespect simply because I was an Indian. It was a completely non-racial organization at the time. It was inclusive in terms of what it did, and our commitment was a complete commitment to a non-racial ethos. What has indeed occurred afterwards is there was a tendency amongst some quarters to become more nationalist and more Africanist, excluding very important cadres who had contributed very meaningfully to the organization. Some are bitter, some are unhappy about that reality, that why is it not as representative as it was? Because our elections were fought on the basis of inclusivity and representativity, both in terms of race and gender. So somehow gender, we were able to succeed better, and there was a decline in terms of representativity from a national perspective in terms of that there. It's being addressed. We've raised it. We've raised it in the conferences. We've raised it with those in authority. But because that tendency has emerged, we cannot walk away from it. We must resist it and overcome it. And you don't overcome it from a distance. You are part of an organization and a movement, and you've got to influence and shape the movement from within.
So are you saying, as someone who's part of the movement and close to the decision makers in the movement, and privy through your own channels to understand what's happening in the movement, is this something that the ANC has taken cognizance of, that there is a feeling amongst minorities that...
Well, we've raised it. I've raised it, and I can be quoted to say that I've raised it in the National Conference of the African National Congress, in the presence of Kgalema Motlanthe, in the presence of Jacob Zuma, in the presence of Cyril Ramaphosa, in the presence of J.C. Duarte. I raised specifically the issues of representativity, not in a quiet corner, amongst comrades and cadres, and nobody opposed it. They were all in agreement. And that is still part of the policy of the African National Congress. And in fact, it is the criterion for eligibility of candidates within the organization. Whether it's implemented in terms of policy is another question.
That's the next question, because that's the question, is how serious is the NC
Well, you know, it is
about this
nobody's being
issue at the moment?
excluded. Nobody's being consciously excluded. But you know, if I have erred in term politically, and many of my comrades of our generation, is we were so drawn into the responsibilities that we had politically in terms of our executive responsibility or our responsibility as parliamentarians, that we did not take time and did not make the effort to nurture, mentor, develop and train young cadres who would follow us. That's our responsibility. I would take the responsibility for that, because they're going to ask me, but what did you do to ensure that I was developed as you were developed and nurtured by the African National Congress? What pressure did you put on me to ensure that I go to branch meetings, that I participate actively as a youth? Now, I'm not saying I did nothing at all, but I'm certainly saying that I didn't do enough insofar as that is concerned. And it's not out of sheer complacency or laziness. And I'm saying that, I'm not saying this in defense of the cadres, is that the enormous responsibilities that we had, either in the executive or otherwise, were so huge that we hardly had time to look at other elements, but we should have made the time. And I think we've erred, and it certainly should take responsibility and accountability for that. And we apologize to our youth.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I'm sure that will be deeply appreciated by the viewers and the listeners. We're in conversation with Enver Surty. We'll be back soon.
In Conversation With is proudly sponsored by Africa Cash and Carry, Crown Mines.
In conversation with Enver Surty. Where was your first big deployment in the African National Congress?
Well, my first big deployment in terms, if I look at my biggest deployment, was to be part of the negotiating team of the Bill of Rights.
That was which year?
That was in 1994 to 1996. We had to do the Constitution within 2 years. And as I've indicated, I was not part of the interim Constitution, but I certainly was part of the final Constitution. And I was assigned the task to be part of it. I started as an observer member, which means that basically you're in the discussion, you're in the conversation, but you can't speak. And then I had the right to speak. And then I was asked to be a negotiator and drafter of many of the provisions in the Bill of Rights. So it was a phenomenal experience. And quite interestingly, very interestingly, I know you're going to get to that in our conversation, is the chairperson of the study group of the ANC on the Bill of Rights was none other than Naledi Pandor. So my submission would go to Naledi Pandor, and the other co-chair, who was Shepherd from SATU, and they would have to look at it and be happy with it and then process it, and that would be it. So our relationship, and I was a provincial whip, and Naledi Pandor at that time was a deputy chief whip in the National Assembly. So that was our relationship. So that was an important deployment, and perhaps the most interesting phase of my political life is to be able to breathe some life into the Constitution, to learn about it, and to learn as quickly as I could. And what I did, because I discovered very quickly that the DA, well, there was the NP and the DP at the time, were receiving advice from academics in terms of how to approach the matter. So I did an LLM at the same time. So I knew what the conversations were, and it was a partnership between University of Western Cape and University of Cape Town. So interestingly enough, they would want to know more from me than I would want to learn from them, because I was in the center of constitutional making in terms of the Bill of Rights. But what it did is I was able to determine already what the thinking was and prepare for it in argument. So it became so easy when you sat with the NP and the DA in plenary, or in your committees, and they raise these points, because you know what the source is, you know exactly, and you fleshed it out almost academically. So it became very, very easy, and that was a wonderful opportunity to have that academic leaning, which assisted me in my political experience. And obviously, we had wonderful people in the committee. I mean, Naledi Pandor was there, Baleka Mbete was there, very stalwarts of the African National Congress.
On the discussion of the Constitution, what was the main difference? Let me say in a simple term that even I probably understand better to myself is, why didn't we just not continue with the previous constitution, remove apartheid, and continue? It's very simplistic, but I think it's important for us to understand why did we need a new constitution? Couldn't we just remove apartheid and we go on with life?
The interim constitution was a document that was developed by all political parties, those that were unbanned and those that were in government. So it was a negotiated constitution, but it didn't have the participation of the people. The interim constitution didn't have socio-economic rights, for example. It didn't have third and fourth generation rights, like right to information, right to administrative justice.
Couldn't we do like...
No, what I'm saying...
Couldn't we take the constitution, then why did we have to develop a new constitution?
Because it had to be people-driven.
Couldn't we then, as our experience goes, amend?
No, I'm just because that was it was good. There were elements in the interim constitution that were excellent. I mean, because all political parties participated in the process. Even Rajbansi was there, from the House of Delegates. They clapped him also once, but I mean, he was there. So everybody had a say there, but it wasn't the voice of the people, because the people had not spoken, and we had perhaps the most inclusive, transparent and democratic process of constitutional making between 1994 and 1996. We went to every corner of the country. We received thousands of submissions. In the Bill of Rights, I perhaps had most submissions over there. And every voice counted, and we looked at those submissions, by the way. They influenced us. But there were limitations in the Constitution itself. I mean, they were in its structure and its form. And one had to basically engage with it. But now we were a people's parliament because we were represented by the electorate. The interim constitution was a composition of people who got together with vested political interests, but it wasn't the people's voice. So that was a necessary process. And certainly we did look very carefully at the constitution, interim constitution. But I mean, we looked at the covenants, we looked at the Human Rights Charter, we looked at the European Union, we looked at the African Constitution. So all those elements were there, and particularly from an ANC perspective, we looked at our Freedom Charter, and we looked at our African Claims document, because those were the basis of what we were going to include in there. So if you look at the interim constitution, for example, and you look at the right to dignity, it's changed, because in the final constitution, we speak about inherent dignity. Which is very close to the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, the first provision there. So the one in there, the property rights was so heavily entrenched in the interim constitution. You probably couldn't do anything from intellectual or otherwise. We changed that completely, and we provided for provisions for expropriation, and we added public interest where there was only public good. We added public interest. We described what public interest was. We included restitution of rights. We spoke about redress. Our equality clause is the first in the country, not in the country, almost the first in the world, where we have it apply horizontally and not vertically only. So before, in the interim constitution, it was a relationship between the state and the citizens in terms of equality. We simply said, no, the state and no person shall discriminate on the following basis. And there were academics and very respected lawyers, even lawyers for the ANC, who felt that we were going too far in introducing the horizontal, horizontal application. Yes.
In the year 2024, looking back at our constitution, how it was developed and where it is now, how do you assess it?
It's a beacon of hope, man, because the Constitution protects us and protects. And one argument that Cyril Ramaphosa at that time made, and which still holds good, he says, draft the Constitution as if you are not in power. So if you were in the minority or if you were in the opposition, what kind of Constitution would you like to have? So then you know that the Constitution is fair. It will protect the rights not only of those who are in government or who are in the governing party, but those who are in the opposition. It would then be a good constitution. And certainly we use that as a yardstick to say, what if we are not there? Would this be a clause that we would want to latch on to, embrace, and regard as a redeeming provision to protect our rights and our interests?
Did Muslim entities, Muslim organizations,
did they
give input? I won't say are you satisfied, but were they good quality inputs?
Oh, I must say, I could mention, and that's perhaps my relationship with the United Ulama Council goes far back, and they made a representation quite interestingly after we almost finalized the constitution, and they were very concerned about a clash between closely held Islamic beliefs and constitutional provisions. So say the right of equality, gender equality. What if there's a clash between the two? Does the court just let the clause of gender equality trump your Islamic beliefs, or does it balance the two? And we created a provision with the permission of Cyril Ramaphosa, and it went through the process, by the way, and I write about this experience, but I don't know if I write specifically about this representation that we received. I know there was a very highly competent lawyer from KwaZulu-Natal at the time. His name escapes me, but he's quite an expert in Islamic law and jurisprudence, especially in interstate law. Dr. Jasad was there, Rem Saluji was there. I think Maulana Bam was there. I think Maulana Patel was there. They came with this request quite late, where the management committee had already agreed to those provisions. And it was just had to be formally accepted by the Constitutional Assembly. And I received this request, and I asked Cyril Ramaphosa, our current president, whether we couldn't accommodate them. And he says, no, go and meet them.
Accommodate the presentation at least.
No, to receive a submission.
To receive the submission,
So he authorized me to meet with them, because I was part of the negotiating team and part of the secretariat of the ANC in the constitution making process. And I did so, and I'm glad I did so. And I really want to get the lawyer's name because he's such a good person, very competent guy. And I told them, please, I listened to their representation, and it was a legitimate concern that they had. And we made an amendment to a provision in the Constitution where the court is now obliged to look at how closely held belief it is. So if it's, for example, to say the length of your pants as compared to gender equality, gender equality would probably trump. But if it's about your belief in your monotheistic belief, or your belief in inheritance as is set out in the Quran, then it has to balance the two in a way that is fair. It doesn't disregard your Islamic closely held beliefs.
And that was a result of the submission made by the United Ulama Council.
It is definitely so. It is definitely so.
So a Muslim organization, the Ulama Council, had an input.
No, absolutely. They are aware of it. They had an input.
I think it's very important for the record. We live in an environment where there's always the extremes, always extreme criticism of the ANC being communist, extreme criticism of Maulanas being conservative. There's always extremes, and we don't give credit.
Interestingly enough, you raise this here, and I think we spoiled for choice. And I'll give you an example. In our constitution, it's quite phenomenal that we have a provision that promotes Arabic, Sanskrit, Hebrew. It promotes Gujarati, Urdu, Telugu, Tamil. It's a million. And nobody made a submission, by the way. Nobody asked for it. We did it. You can say thank Praveen Gordon and Enver Surty for including that there. But we couldn't make it narrow. I couldn't just have Arabic and not have Hebrew out there or Sanskrit out there. So we made it broad enough to include everybody. But we put it in as a founding provision in the Constitution. Now, nobody said thank you to us, but we didn't even announce to the world, hey, listen, this is what Praveen and I did. But that's what we did. We put it to the Secretariat. We put it to all political parties. They accepted it. So why should we argue about it? So there was no argument about it. But it was not in the interim constitution, it was introduced in the final constitution. I'm just giving you one of many examples.
No, I appreciate it.
And that must indeed be recognized. This amendment here, because helped us such a great deal in terms of freedom of expression, where there was something, a challenge against against the Muslim community or something at the time, and I know it went to the Gauteng High Court, and quite interestingly, the judge that was sitting there was a Muslim, and he relied on this particular provision to say that this limitation has to be respected because there's a limitation in terms of freedom of expression and a limitation in terms of Section 15.1, I think, of the Constitution. Now, another important part, and here again, now it's so interesting that we're having a conversation at this time, and I could share this with you. Naledi Pandor is an incredibly, remarkably intelligent, gifted, eloquent, and honest person. And we were part of the study group of the ANC in the constitution making process. And the interim constitution provided for freedom of expression without any limitations. Without any limitations. Drafted the amended constitution, and I put in a limitation, introduced a limitation on the basis of religion, on the basis of race, and on the basis of gender. So if there's hate speech in relation to those three elements over there, then it's just, if there's imminent harm, that can be caused as a result of that, then it can be, the freedom of expression can be limited. Unusual. So obviously there was an outcry from within the organization, and I'm not going to mention names. Senior members of the African National Congress receive a call. You have to attend a meeting at the hotel very close to Parliament. So two of us are called, Naledi Pandor and Enver Surty. Both happen to be Muslim, by the way. And we called because of our role in the process, not because we are Muslim, by the way. And the argument is basically, why are we limiting the right to freedom of expression? And we argued that, at that time we had the Bosnian situation over there. We had the situation in Gaza, interestingly enough, the Intifada had happened over there. And then we raised how religion, because the argument was mainly against religion, less about race, how religion basically could create a problem, religious intolerance. And hate speech against a religious group can create this particular situation, so I was a spokesperson and Naledi was a spokesperson. The two of us spoke, and we had senior members in the audience. You had Nelson Mandela, Thabo Mbeki, Cyril Ramaphosa, who was our Deputy Secretary General, the lady. Oh God, man.
Jinwala?
No, not Jinwala. So close to me. But anyway, I'm getting old now. And the Treasury General was there. And we had to persuade the Big Five at the time. There was no national chairperson at the time of the ANC, that indeed our cause is right. And after Naledi Pandor's very eloquent exposition, I write about this, by the way, in my book, In Pursuit of Dignity. The story is there. And I consciously put the story there that all the participants who were part of that conversation would be able to read it. And if they disagreed with that truth, then they would say so. So they've all had the book for many years now. And it has never been contested. But what is interesting out there is it concluded with the following, and I raised this. Nelson Mandela said, after listening to arguments on both sides, I am rather shocked and surprised that there is opposition to a limitation clause of hate speech against religion. I thought our founding fathers in the African National Congress were very religious people. They were reverent, they were learned religious people, and there was never any opposition to religious beliefs or a respect for religion in relation to our cohesion. So if at all you want to exclude religion, then you must exclude race, and then you must exclude gender. That was the last word. No other arguments ours went through. Alhamdulillah. And that's why we have the limitation clause today. And now as we look back, I'm sure Naledi feels, and she must be smiling wherever she's sitting. She says, Enver, we've made the right decision.
I mean, I remember in 2006, there was the Danish cartoon issue, and they were about to publish a cartoon.
That's in South Africa, the
South
Gauteng
Africa.
case. That is exactly the same
And then
case.
Maulana Abam, Jamatul Ulama, they opposed, I
But,
think it was
I'm
a stop.
saying the limitation clause and the other one, the Section 50, those two combined basically gave us the opportunity to prohibit the publication of that.
Of those cartoons,
yes. So I'm saying that is the value of what has been done. And that was done by the African National Congress. Naledi Pandor was in the African National Congress. I was in the African National Congress. So the ANC supported the Muslim community at a time when it could be dismissive. It was so small in number, and it was relevant. And the Muslim public representative, Yusuf Pahad, Aziz Pahad, Ibrahim Patel, Fatima Chauhan, Yahya, is now Johnny Dalanga, have contributed significantly to our transformation. And not one of them not a finger has been pointed against any one of them for malfeasance or corruption. Not one of them. 30 years, not one of them. So I'm still proud to be a member of the African National Congress because they are still there. Naledi is still there and she's Muslim and she's a member of the ANC. And we've never disputed and denied the fact that there's corruption, there's malfeasance, that we have to deal with these matters, the issues of inclusivity, etc., etc. We have to deal with these matters.
Do you think the ANC today possesses that type of, that depth of intellectual prowess, the sincerity that a generation of leaders had, and that vision that they had? Does the ANC have that? I mean, the question is for all political parties, but if any political party should have to do with ANC to take us into the next 30 years, globally, there's a realignment in Europe, there's a realignment in Asia, there's artificial intelligence, there's mass migration into South Africa. South Africa is changing. I mean, some of the guests who have been sitting here are saying they've calculated numbers in South Africa, the different organizations spoken to, and they're saying there's about let's say 2.5 million Muslims at the moment, and by the next election, in the next 7 or 8 years, that number might go up to 5 or 5.5 because of the migrants who are becoming legal. The current migrants are the current Somalis and Bengalis.
You have to just go to our masjid.
Who will be entering the process legally. So that could explode in the next few years. So generally, at the ANC at the moment, do you believe, or are you satisfied, or you're concerned? Does the ANC? I'm not even talking about fixing roads and fixing potholes. No. At the visionary level, does the ANC have the depth at the moment to take itself through
I think it does. I think it's a yes and a no. The no would be the disappointment is that the deployment of cadres to parliament and legislatures was almost, it wasn't reflected on very seriously. They didn't look at the issues of experience, skills, representativity, service to community, etc., strongly enough and closely enough. There was a great deal of political opportunism that went into the process. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody is like that. I think a measure of the capacity of the ANC would be, if you look at the ICJ, its presentation, led by a young Minister of Justice, led by Naledi Pandor, a seasoned Minister of International Relations, and a Muslim, by the way, and did such a profoundly wonderful job in terms of putting a principled position. Now that courage, that fortitude, that boldness, that bravery of the ANC, you don't find it anywhere else. Not on the continent, not in our country, and not in the world. We were the first to do it. Now to say that you still have second thoughts about an organization that is willing to say that we've lost trillions in income as a result of punitive measures, that we are being compromised in terms of relations with the strongest powers, the European Union, the United States, that notwithstanding all that, we stood for the truth and principle in solidarity with people who have stood with us and who happen to be Muslim. That should have some meaning should have some weight, some gravitas in terms of our understanding. And if it becomes insignificant in the minds of our people, then they must have really retrospect. Because what we see on television is the strength of belief in Iman, in the brothers and sisters and the children in Palestine. We see the strength of Iman in those soldiers who are fighting in Yemen, our brothers are the Yemenis. We see that solidarity out there. And we see a lack of it in quarters where we thought it would emerge strongest in the Muslim community. So that needs some reflection to say, what is this righteousness and this commitment to justice that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about in the Quran, that is peremptory on us, that formed the basis of the life of our Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It was about justice. It's about equity.
And this is what the ANC, in your opinion, upholds?
My opinion is in terms of this particular situation, it basically did the most Islamic thing that one could think of. It has to do a lot more in terms of addressing the state capture issues, the corruption issues, the malfeasance issues.
But at the end of the day, I mean, there's another way of framing this. And the other way of framing this is saying Gaza, Palestine, it's part and parcel of South African foreign policy. And South Africa has done great work as a government in the Gaza issue. Mm-hmm. But your foreign policy is African-based and SADC-based. What are we doing on our own borders? What are we doing with migration on borders? So I'm saying, what is the context? Because I mean, the issue is also, you know.
Okay, may I answer?
No, I just want to get, you know, because the Gaza, and that is very important to me and to you as Muslims, but other ANC constituents, especially if you look at the poor, the uneducated, the unemployed, etc. How does that issue of a foreign policy affect their livelihoods, the betterment of their situation? And I'm still waiting to hear about the other side of the ANC, is the side that makes you believe they do not have the capacity, the depth, and knowledge to go.
I'll go to that immediately after I've responded to that. You know, just a month ago, the Deputy President was in the DRC. No, not the Deputy President. Our former Minister of Justice was in the DRC as a special envoy sent by government to assist out there. We have troops as well deployed over there to assist in the peacekeeping. We are in Mozambique.
Minister Jeff Radebe was there.
Yeah, Minister Jeff Radebe was there. He was there. The special envoy is sent by our President. And with the team, you didn't go there as a single individual, with the team over there, supported by DIRCO, by the International Relations. You've been in that environment, so you would know how it works. We are in Mozambique as well, providing support. And one part of your Lady R issue rotates around the need for those weapons that we required for our special forces in Mozambique, by the way. Okay. So you might not know about it. I served on the panel. I can share that.
I do know that I read the very interesting 5-page report.
Okay.
But I want to ask.
Well, we crafted a much more longer report.
No, I know that was the.
So I can't disclose everything else, but I'm just sharing that with you.
Yeah.
As I'm sitting here, I'm a facilitator with the High Commissioner of the United Kingdom in Southern Sudan, and while we are in Southern Sudan, we are also trying to engage in issues in Sudan. So yes, Mozambique, yes, DRC, yes, Southern Sudan, and Sudan itself. And obviously we play an important role in the African Union. So to suggest that we're only looking at Palestine and ignoring the Africa would not be true. So as I'm sitting here, I'm now part of the facilitators, two of us facilitating there, because our Deputy President is a special envoy there. Just 3 years ago, I was with Dikgang Moseneke, busy with constitutional reform in Lesotho. When we started there, the army was there, the military presence in the streets. Within 3 months, they were all gone. And they had an election without a fist being thrown. South Africa drove that process because our president, Cyril Ramaphosa, was the delegate by SADC, and because he became president, he was deputy president at the time, he became president, he asked SADC whether we could basically continue on his behalf as a collective and report to SADC, which we did. So my personal experience takes me to two countries. And I'm certain if you go to DIRCO, they will tell you about the other countries where South Africa is really involved and engaged in. I know Somalia. And interestingly enough, when I was in Southern Sudan, I meet the United Nations rep, Finkhausen, South African, advisor to Nelson Mandela, involved in the constitutional making process, particularly the interim constitution. And so what a wonderful person. South African is contributing now to change and stability there. So with regard to competencies and skills, yes, look, some skills you can't get. It's going to be difficult to get another O.R. Tambo. It's going to be difficult to get another Nelson Mandela. It's difficult to get another Paulo Jordaan. I'm saying we've had a category, a group of leaders, and we've lost many of them over there. We have skilled people over here, and we must get our politics right. We must get our deployment right in terms of those institutions. And I'm not suggesting at all that it is correct. So Parliament is certainly not what it was. I certainly do believe that it can do much better. But amongst those that are in Parliament, they are very competent, dedicated, skilled people who can contribute. That's in your legislatures as well. So we shouldn't be over hasty in our generalization. But at the same time, be realistic to say that the ANC has erred in its deployment.
I mean, you do understand that that the frustration of the public when what we see out of the executives, whenever they open their mouths, they're gaffing, they're talking nonsense. Videos of ministers drunk, partially drunk. The behavior, the utterances. And I think this is when we compare what we have today in terms of leadership to what we had in leadership during your time. That is a comparison we're making. We're not looking for an hour Tambo. We're just looking for an executive where people don't get drunk. There are no rape allegations. There are no battering allegations. There are no. We're just looking for some type of relative decent behavior because we expect, and I'm sure you would agree, that members of public office at that level should be held to a much higher level of accountability and conduct than the rank and file and of the organization.
I certainly agree with you. I certainly agree with you, and I will never try to defend something that is wrong. I mean, blatantly wrong. So if there's any corruption, if there's any abuse, if there's any allegations of rape, etc., we can't be sitting in defense of those people out there. I don't think there is a place, and there shouldn't be a space for them. But I'm saying at the same time, there are people who are doing wonderful work in Parliament, so we shouldn't be over hasty.
Give me a few names of some of the good people still in the ANC.
You're talking about the executive itself?
Wherever in the ANC.
Ibrahim Patel is extremely hardworking. You've got Gwen. Gwen is now. I'm so glad she's now in the executive of the ANC. Gwen Ramahopa, who's the treasurer, absolutely brilliant. Joe Patla, the Minister of Health, he's got a huge task at hand. The NHI is not easy, by the way, but he's honest, hardworking, disciplined. Well, I worked with Angie Motsecha. She might have shortcomings in certain areas, but she is competent, she's skilled, she's a good listener, and she's producing the results, irrespective of what they say. So amongst them, I mean, I'm not going to give a report card to all the ministers, but I'm saying to you that in cabinet there are people. I mean, you obviously say, why not Naledi Pandor? Obviously, he would come first. I've worked so long with her, and I was a deputy minister anyway for a period of time. So our link is. We're almost inseparable from that perspective. But there are people who are good. The current Minister of Justice, some people might have different views, but in my opinion, he's done relatively well. Given his youth, he's done extremely well. There isn't an unease about him managing the portfolio as such. So there's huge potential going forward. We must be more selective. We must be more cautious in terms of our appointment. And I'm not going to disagree insofar as that is concerned. But I think, my generation, gained from the experience of those above us. I mean, the Albertina Sisulus, and those that had served for such a long time. I mean, for me to go into Parliament and sit in the same chamber and be in the company of Governor Mbeki, and his son is now deputy president at that time and then becomes president. I've learned from them. I've listened to them. So I didn't know these things. I gained from them. They matured, I imbibed. And so too will a new generation imbibe from us. And where we erred as a collective is that we didn't develop adequately. There are many young comrades and cadres who are extremely good, but we didn't do so broadly and strongly enough. And and opportunism and greed has crept in. Yes, indeed, and political games are being played, but that is the reality that is there. So I'm saying I'm confident that there is ability. But, I would want you, as you engage with people at your level, social level, find out how many, go to 50 people, just at random, not only where you're staying, but around the country because you travel far and wide. Go to the Indian community and ask them is there any of you who has attended a branch meeting? If you get 2 out of 50, you are very lucky. Now, that's a very important question.
Yes.
If you want to express an opinion about a political party and you're not willing to even go to a branch meeting, do you genuinely think others must do it for you? Shouldn't you be able to say, look, I will take that responsibility and be part of it and raise my voice there, and then if it's not heard, then I can say, well, look, I've raised it. Like I've raised now. I said, this is what I said about representativity. Go down, ask the comrades, and I'll be on air. So my president can hear, Ramaphosa will be able to hear, Jacob Zuma will be able to hear. Did Enver Surty say that or didn't he say so? He said so in the presence, not of one delegate, more than 250 in the commission. And I was a rapporteur. In every thing I would give a rapporteur either for justice or social development. So you got the whole plenary there. So, but at least I've raised the voice. And I continue to raise it.
Where's your branch?
My branch is in Houghton.
In Houghton?
Yeah.
When did you leave Rustenburg?
I left Rustenburg a few years ago.
Okay.
And I've been to Houghton meetings, by the way.
No.
Yes, I've been there.
Oh, that's great.
And so is my wife. Yeah, she's also a comrade. She chaired the meeting for a branch for more than 12 years.
That's great.
For more than 12 years. And it was a non-racial branch. It included coloreds, included Africans, and included whites.
That's great. Enver Surty, we'll be back with you now. We're on conversation with Enver Surty. Stick around.
In Conversation With is proudly sponsored by Africa Cash and Carry, Crown Mines.
In conversation with Enver Surty. Enver Surty is unique among ANC cadres in that you endured through the Mbeki term, Kgalema Motlanthe, Jacob Zuma. You got part of President Ramaphosa.
Yes. Yeah, well, it was an extraordinary privilege. I mean, say Shukar, it's a privilege that I certainly was in Parliament when Nelson Mandela was our president. I certainly wasn't in the executive at that time, but I was in the executive with Thabo Mbeki. He was my president while I served as the minister.
You were Minister of Education then?
Deputy Minister of Education.
Deputy
Minister of Education with Naledi Pandor at the time. I was with Kgalema Motlanthe. I was the Minister of Justice at the time. I was with Cyril Ramaphosa when I was Deputy Minister of Basic Education. So I've served with all the presidents of the country, and they are all unique. And
so most.
And Jacob Zuma, obviously.
No,
pardon. I haven't. It slipped. It's an omission.
That's very coming because you mentioned state capture, and if I'm not mistaken, but most of the ministers who made it from the Thabo Mbeki cabinet into the Jacob Zuma cabinet was ardent supporters of Jacob Zuma, or rather, let me say, they were part of the Umshiniwa movement in Polokwane. I mean, I clearly remember Trevor Manuel resigned.
Yes.
And there was an interview, and it sticks in my mind. And in the interview, he said, I asked him, why did you resign, and he said, I served at the pleasure of my president, and my president has changed, and I'm leaving.
But then he was back as the minister.
No,
Yeah.
and Jacob Zuma.
But
but he left under Jacob Zuma.
No, but he was a minister. Wasn't he a minister in the presidency?
No.
Oh, no, he was the head of the development plan, national development plan, with Cyril Ramaphosa as the deputy chair.
Yes. What was your role politically?
Well,
when in Polokwane, because Polokwane seems to be a
I was
watershed
at
moment.
Polokwane.
It seems like a watershed moment for the ANC, because today we're sitting with the MK party and we have to go back to Polokwane.
Yeah, I was in Polokwane, and certainly I was when Thabo Mbeki was withdrawn, I was on my way back from Cameroon. I remember it was Ramadan, and I was on my way home, and we were called to a meeting, all ministers and deputy ministers, and given the assurance that none of us would basically lose our positions as a result of the recall of Thabo Mbeki, because of a judgment in a case that had taken place in Pietermaritzburg. We were invited to speak, and I mentioned in that meeting, in the presence of Jacob Zuma, Kgalema Motlanthe was there, I mentioned that I think that the judgment was a very poor judgment, and whilst I am certainly pleased that it benefits our president, at that time he was not then president of the country.
What was the judgment in Pietermaritzburg?
The judgment was that there was political influence.
Okay, yes.
There was political influence, and as a result, political influence in the decision to prosecute Jacob Zuma. But there was no evidence to that effect. And I'd read the judgment before I came in. I said so, and I said it in the most respectful way, to the extent that one of my former colleagues, who was also Deputy Minister of Communications at the time, told me, "Are you crazy or what, to raise a matter like that?" So I asked him, was I crass or crude or rude in the manner in which he says, "No, you were very respectful." But I wouldn't, he said, "But I wouldn't do that." Well, I did it because I felt it was the case. And lo and behold, a month after that, I'm called to the Chief Whip's office. Kgalema Motlanthe is now made president. I'm now made president of justice. And when I go to the chamber, sitting up there is Jacob Zuma, waving at me.
So you were not part of the movement.
Why would I say what I said?
You were not part of the movement that ushered in Jacob Zuma.
No, absolutely not. So people are now asking me, they can understand why I, after doing such a good job as a Minister of Justice, I wasn't a Minister of Justice in the second term. Is it because of? And I don't care. To me, it didn't matter.
What was your relationship with President Jacob Zuma?
With Jacob Zuma, is very good.
What?
Excellent. As a Chief Whip, he was the leader of government business. Very respectful, very decent. He would never leave the chamber without asking my permission as Chief Whip. Can you believe it? And he was the Deputy President. So he would write to me, says, "I have this, may I?" I said, "You don't even have to ask me, Deputy President, you may." And he was very, very respectful. And I've always had a good relationship with him. Till the end, I've had a good relationship with him. To pretend otherwise, the only thing is what changed when Thabo Mbeki wasn't there and Jacob Zuma was there. And to an extent, I think Trevor Manuel had a hand in that, is that deputy ministers were no longer invited to cabinet meetings, and they would only be present at the request of the president. So when the discussions took place, whether it's about Zondo, with issues raised in the Zondo Commission or whatever else, we would not form part of cabinet as deputy ministers. We could not influence cabinet. And I certainly would not take responsibility for those decisions because I wasn't part of the discussion.
But you were part of the bigger environment of what happened in the movement. You were seeing people.
Yes, I was. But certain decisions had to be taken.
You don't. You're not attending the cabinet meeting.
Yes.
But you attend parliament meetings,
yes,
NEC meetings, etc., etc.
Yeah, but in parliament, you basically, if you're a member of the executive, you're so busy with your portfolio. You're not looking at all the other matters as if you're serving in a portfolio committee.
But these things didn't happen. But these things didn't happen one day. Everything happened. These things happened over a period of time. And just like, we...
Look, in a sense, the ANC has to take responsibility for that. They should have raised their voices. Some of us had. Some of us had raised our voices.
9 wasted years. Do you agree with that?
I wouldn't say completely, no. I think there was good things. There's good things
and bad things, and the people.
But I think much more could have been achieved.
And the people are claiming 9 wasted years. Many of them were there, including our current president, who was deputy president.
I was there myself. And I mean, if I look at the sector that I was attached to, I don't think that in education we had wasted years. And I can give you just 3 quick examples of why it would not be wasted years. Take the Eastern Cape. They stopped delivering textbooks to schools, stopped delivering stationery. Children were not being fed, right? And they couldn't manage their budget. Meeting was held, we had to make an intervention. Jacob Zuma says, Enver, says to me directly, you go and deal with the matter as a deputy minister. We went out there. Go to Eastern Cape now. Every child is fed. For the past 10 years, there was not a problem. Perhaps they have the best feeding scheme. Almost every school has utensils and a kitchen. And food is prepared by the community for the children. No corruption. Communities own that particular process. Textbooks are delivered. We centralize procurement over there. Make sure that you don't have these Mickey Mouse guys who are doing it over there. Provincial procurement, thousands are being saved. The budget was sorted out, and Eastern Cape now, and I can look back and say, well, what we did as the foundation is now showing, has performed extremely well. I think the 4th or 5th, they used to be right at the bottom of the rung of the ladder. That's one example. All right. Feeding scheme, we increased the feeding scheme from 5 million to 9.2 million. Children being fed every day at school. It's statistics, it's numbers. 56 million books, word books, are being distributed to every child from grade R to grade 11, free of charge and on time. How did that happen? We had the Limpopo debacle. Remember?
That was early in the.
That was early, about 10.
Early in your 10 years as deputy minister.
But what did we do about it? We centralized the whole procurement of workbooks. We made sure that we are able to track every workbook. We can give you every account, and there's been no late delivery after that. 56 million books being delivered every year to every public child in a public school. I'm just giving examples. Mathematics, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, you probably had 80,000 that passed mathematics. Mathematics is fundamental. You now have more than 250,000 passing mathematics. And more than 100,000 passing above 60%.
Are you happy with the fit with the low percentage pass
I'm very
targets?
You know how we move incrementally. When we started off, if I look at in my first 10 years with NG Motsekga, when we started off, the bachelor's passes were at about 18%. It's now at about 43%. Bachelor's passes, 43% from 18%, that's huge. So I'm not saying it's at the perfect position, but it has certainly improved considerably. One must take into account, and people tend to forget. One must, by the way, this is in Zuma's thing over here. During his time, I know I was given the responsibility for infrastructure because things were not going right. And I even had the Deputy Minister of Finance because I told Pravin Gordon, who was the Minister of Finance, listen, you send your deputy to sit in the meetings where we call up.
Was that Nene?
Yeah, yes. And he sat with me and we took off with the contractors and the lawyers.
But why is that
we were
so
able
difficult
to deliver, hold on, we were able to deliver 50 schools, we were able to deliver 100 schools a year for 2 years in succession. 2 schools a week. State-of-the-art schools. Now, I'm saying, was there non-delivery? Were we corrupt? Was any finger pointed? There was absolutely no sign of malfeasance politically in the Department of Education. Absolutely not. So now, can we basically carry the sins of Jacob Zuma and say, well, this is it. I'm not saying that everything went right. There was corruption in other portfolios, yes. But I invite anybody to say, during those 10 years that I was there, during the 9 years of his time, point one finger of a corrupt tender within the National Department, of any malfeasance, and I'll say, well, look, okay, you're right. I'm wrong.
I want to stay on the character of President Jacob Zuma. ANC will rule until Jesus comes. I remember that. And when I think of President Jacob Zuma,
and now you think about MK.
Why did the ANC? So first of all, why was there such vengeance against President Jacob Zuma when he left? We get the feeling. Even people who are not part of the ANC, they sit and look back. Why do we have to go after him like that? It is.
I think it's because these things happen, the corruption and malfeasance, the state capture occurred under his helm. I mean, the Guptas basically knew him, were associated with him, there's evidence to that effect, and that created the anger. That was the anger, because on another level, on a personal level, I mean, you won't find a more polite and kinder guy. It's just really a wonderful person to chat with, and he would not be, he never obstructed us in the work that we did. I mean, I don't know about my minister, but I can say me personally, never told me, listen, don't do this, you can't do this, you can't do that. Or go to the Guptas and organize a tender with them. He never did that with me.
I mean, although the State Capture Commission was initiated under President Jacob Zuma, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, it was. It was arising from the Public Protector's report, yes.
But do you think the ANC and government could have managed the Jacob Zuma
I think we could have done better.
Situation.
We should have done better. We should have done better.
I'm not promoting the ANC in this line of questioning, but I'm just looking at the dynamics with the ANC in terms of what it has costed the ANC.
No, we could have done better. There's no question about it. Corruption is corruption, malfeasance is malfeasance. You can't defend it under any circumstance, whether it's Jacob Zuma, whether it's Cyril Ramaphosa or Kgalema Motlanthe, So that's it, So I'm not going to defend that. They were difficult years for us. We're seeing the results of those years now, in the aftermath of it, So people must begin to understand, you are not in Transnet. You're not in PRASA. You're not dealing with those matters. You got this portfolio, with 12 million children, and you're working on all those things. Those almost become, and you're not in cabinet. It's almost become side issues over there. You don't even know what's going on there. And you're not in those conversations. We were in the conversations with Thabo Mbeki. So I can give you an example how those conversations help. Because when the issue of early childhood development came up, there was no budget allocated to it. I raised the issue in cabinet. In cabinet committee meetings.
In Zuma?
No, in Thabo Mbeki, because we were invited to those meetings at the time. So in the cabinet meeting, I raised it. And the instruction was given to Trevor Manuel there and then to say allocation must be made for it. And that was the seed money that started grade R, which is now in all our schools. Naledi Pandya will tell you that. So we were able to do that. And obviously we do that with the backing of our ministers. And Naledi was just phenomenal insofar as that is concerned. That was something, it's her brainchild, not mine. It was her brainchild, and basically I was her voice in that meeting.
Now President Jacob Zuma started the MK party. Do you as the ANC or as an ANC member, with the insights that you have, do you think that is it a threat at any level, at the regional level?
I think it is a threat. He is popular. And it's a populist attempt at basically gaining votes, clearly. It goes against the spirit of the African National Congress. I can't speak too much about these issues because I serve on the National Disciplinary Committee of the ANC. So if a matter of this nature comes before me, then I don't want my words to be quoted. I don't know if it was said within the ANC or somewhere, but there was some talk that the Jacob Zuma issue would go to the Disciplinary Committee. I don't know, because we don't make those decisions. It's the National Disciplinary Committee. The ANC decides, and
is President Zuma still a member of the ANC or not?
To my knowledge, he's not. He's been expelled by the NEC.
Because that's what we understood.
So I do not suspect, but I don't know. So it might well be that you may be suspended, and the member who's a member of the ANC says to the NEC or to the working committee, but listen, these statements that I've made are misunderstood. I'm not a member of MK, and I would like to have a hearing. What do you do under the circumstances?
Okay.
I don't know if that has happened. I don't know. Okay. I don't know, but I don't want to preempt. But I'm saying to you that when we deal with these matters here, as we did with Carl Niehaus and deal with Isma Khashule, we have to have open mind, and not be influenced by what the public says.
So you believe that President Jacob Zuma, is a formidable force in terms of elections, or a force?
I think in KwaZulu-Natal he would probably draw some support. I don't know how strong it would be, but I mean, he has been president for a long time, and he has been in the ANC for a long time. He's been the president of the African National Congress.
Was the ANC shocked when he started his MK party? You, as someone who served under him and someone who knew him.
Well, I was surprised.
I was surprised.
I was really surprised. I was really surprised that he did that. And I don't know, I never had an opportunity to speak to him and inquire what the reason was for that. But I mean, I was disappointed and surprised, yes, I was. And as I've indicated, look, at a personal level, we got along extremely well.
I get the feeling, and I go back to, again, irrespective of how you feel about the ANC and all of that, the videos, and I think my cameraman here, he was in Nkandla when President Jacob Zuma was arrested, and he took some of that footage. It was very emotive footage, watching him being arrested. It was very intense, and I think I know the whole country was watching.
There was a lot that was happening prior to his arrest.
Yes, of course,
a lot of voices and so
that
forth.
led up to that. And when you look at that, when I look at that, I'm not surprised.
Look, I mean, Jacob Zuma is not a young man, he's an old man. And I don't even know why he's still in politics, he should be retiring.
Are you taking that line?
I would really think that, he's old. I wouldn't want to go back into politics here. I don't want to be a minister. I don't want to be anything. I don't have any political aspirations other than serving my organization and my country. I mean, that's basically it.
How do you assess and evaluate the position of Muslims and other ethnic minorities in South Africa today? Given, I mean, we have, and I'll put something on. You have entities like the AFF going to the Constitutional Court to say we want to say Kill the Boer.
We want to
sing Kill the Boer. I mean, and the question is not about the legality of that. It's the type of sentiment, I was a few in December. Bongani Ngema passed away. And I remember
that song of his.
I remember that. There's this minorities and Muslims being part of them. I won't say alarmed, but feel worried. What is our future in this country? There are more and more negative and inflammatory conversations happening in social media about African nationalism or whatever it may be. From the African National Congresses and from you, such as someone who's been through history.
Okay. Well, it's very easy for me to answer because, look, I could say the Muslims have been respected all the time. They've had the benefit of protection of their religious beliefs under the African National Congress. So if I was a member of the executive, it doesn't mean, if I'm no longer a member of the executive, it doesn't mean that the protection doesn't exist. I've left almost 5 years. No child with a beard has been expelled from school. No child wearing a pants has been expelled or a headscarf. Those values that we hold dear to us are still maintained and protected by the ANC. And that's for 30 years.
Do you think they could be removed? They could go if other political parties
come
into
yes. I mean, here's the evidence. Look at what happened in Cape Town. They paint a Palestinian flag. And the city council, with the knowledge of their provincial government, basically decides to paint over it. So there is a visible, ostensible threat. But show me one threat, one instance where the ANC said there shouldn't be adhan, or there shouldn't be a mosque, or you can't wear a headscarf. Nothing like that has ever emerged for 30 years. Now, if you get that kind of protection from a political party, you ought to be comfortable. You should be saying, what do we do to improve on the weaknesses of that political party? What do we do to provide the kind of capacity that you're speaking about, the competence and the skills to ensure that we strengthen the party with people who have the skills and the integrity to be able to take it to another cause? It's a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge. It's a daunting challenge, but we have to do something about it, and we can't do it from the outside.
What are the future challenges that you think South Africa will have as a country?
I think as a country, it's about collisions, the dangers and risk of collisions. I've just finished in the first two and a half years of my so-called retirement, being in Lesotho. And the biggest problem in Lesotho was collisions, playing musical chairs, the elite occupying those positions. Today it's X, tomorrow it's Y. So today it's going to be the EFF because...
But coalitions work in some parts of the world? Western Europe?
They work marginally. But in South Africa, our context is very, very different. If you take away the majority party that has such a strong sentiment and commitment to social cohesion, non-racialism, irrespective of the tendencies that may emerge within the organization. But it has that commitment that is unwavering. And the freedoms of your religion and freedoms of your belief, whether you're Muslim or non-Muslim or a non-believer, it doesn't matter. The freedom of conscience, the respect for the Constitution, those things there are difficult to acquire. So for 30 years, it has not betrayed the Constitution. Even when the odds were against them, even when the courts found against them, they complied.
I mean, that's very interesting because the courts, Mogoeng, they found against the ANC and against President Jacob Zuma on quite a few times.
Yes. They did.
To support what you're saying in honesty.
And that is why you basically had the situation of the Zondo Commission. Because it was because the report of the public protector was that a commission should be established to do so. He couldn't do so as himself. He's the president.
And an interesting part of Judge Mogoeng is when he was appointed, there was a lot of opposition to his appointment. Because they said that he was in close proximity to President Zuma for something or some reason, and then later he found against President Zuma. That was so people in the media we do notice.
Now Mogoeng wants to become the next president of the country. He said so publicly. There's two interviews. He says he's been ordained by God to be the next president of the country, and he says that with conviction.
Like Jacob Zuma said, ANC will rule till Jesus comes.
Yes, and you know what I told Jacob Zuma? I beg to differ. My Jesus has come. So he says, what do you mean? I says, I have a grandson. His father's name is Muhammad, and his name is Isa, and Isa is Jesus. So my Jesus has come. So we had a laugh about it.
I can only imagine President Zuma.
Yeah, he was laughing. He was just laughing.
Laugh at that. The future of Muslims and Islam, the Muslim community in South Africa. I mean, at the end of the day, we're also not monolithic.
Yes.
I think I might be reading it wrong. Is there apathy in the political process? Do you see leadership amongst the Muslim community, youth community, whoever?
You see, I'm glad you're raising this question. If you ask me about a concern, you spoke earlier about the fact that Muslim population is 2.5 million and would probably be 5 million if everybody's legalized within the community, given the fact that there's so many refugees from Malawi, from Ethiopia, from Somalia, and other parts of the world, Bangladesh, Pakistan included. So that is the reality. And if you go to the masjid, you find that it's a reality. Whether it's for Fajr Salah or Isha Salah, you would find that the dominant group is not the indigenous Indian Muslim group. It is mainly, I put it in inverted commas, foreign group, as it were. So that reality is there. Now, there is a feeling amongst many of the Indians to say, look, we had so many people in parliament, we had so many people in the executive, where are our Muslims now? So they're concerned that they've been excluded. Now, how would this 2.5 million Muslims feel if they are excluded from trusteeships, management, participation in governance of our mosques and our Islamic institutions? Would they be justified in saying, but hell, we're Muslim, we have a right, just as you say, as a Muslim, you have a right as a citizen of this country to exercise your belief. They would say, don't we have similar rights in terms of our religious domain in that particular arena, his favorite word, arena. So that is something that one has to look at very seriously, to say to what extent is assimilation and integration taking place amongst Muslims, irrespective of nationality, of ethnicity, of color, in our schools, in our madrasas, in our mosques, and broadly in our structures. Because that there would determine the future of the Muslim Ummah in this country. And if we're going to be insular and too comfortable, then we are missing a huge opportunity.
What is your reading? Where are we going? Are we coming insular? Are we open? What is your reading?
I think it's mixed. I think it's mixed. I think some people have indeed seen the reality and are integrating and assimilating in a very, very positive, concrete way. There are others who just don't feel any sense of attachment to the broader community of Muslims. And that's unfortunate.
Do you, I mean, of course, you're a member of the ANC, but there are Muslims who are joining the ranks of other political parties. There are Muslims in the DA, there are Muslims in some of the new political parties that have been established. How do you feel about this? Do you think it's healthy for Muslims to be in? I'm asking you to try to be objective because the other political parties are your opposition.
Because obviously I would be partial and biased because I'm a member of the African National Congress. But at the same time, I must be tolerant of the fact that there are members who are in the IFP and who are in the DA and who are in other political parties, in the EFF, who are Muslim. Do I stop speaking to them? No, I continue speaking to them. I developed a wonderful relationship with Buthelezi, and he had a high respect for me, and we got along extremely well. It doesn't mean that I'd forgotten where he came from. It means that he probably has recognized the value of our democracy, appreciated it, and without having saying so loudly, but privately said, look, man, I might have erred. Let me go on a course and redeem myself in a way. So he basically took a good cause insofar as that is concerned. Unlike, you got Muhamed basically, who basically is asked to apologize, and he says now in an interview he's apologized because he's been ordered to do so, he respects the rule of law. But he hasn't basically retracted, nor has he said, listen, I'm not going to condone this genocide. Unfortunate. He doesn't speak about it. So I just think that you must have the courage and character to be in leadership. If you're going to ask me, would I become? I get along. By the way, we are homeboys. We come from the same province, Muhamed and I, and we know each other long before I was a minister. Mm-hmm. So there is a relationship there, and but I just think he's missing one important dimension, and what we stand for as an organization. For creating a better Africa and a better world, and our commitment to non-racialism and for the liberation of the oppressed people.
You believe South Africa and Muslims are safe in the hands of the ANC?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I have absolutely no doubt about that. Okay. Unless the Muslim community begins to basically shoot themselves in the foot. There are ways in which you can do things, and there are ways that's discipline. Now, so you have a present situation out here that's on social media. They say HIF schools will be closed by the ANC government. Now, where the hell do you get that from? Madrasas will be closed. ANC is taking away the power from governing bodies. And now if you look at it closely, you say, but all our Islamic schools, they don't even have governing bodies, they have trusts. So where does that come from, right? Then they say the Bella Bill talks about abortion and teenage pregnancy. It only has one statement to say that management of pregnant learners will be done by regulation. One sentence. Now, do Muslims basically have to say things that are not right? They can raise their concerns legitimately, but to distort them in a way that creates confusion in the minds of the Muslims, and then those Muslims who are complacent, who don't even bother to read or to check, basically say, yes, that's going to happen. So the same organization that's protected you, protected your mosque, protected your madrasa, if you go to parliament, if you are in the main restaurant, you're not going to be served liquor, intoxicants, because of Muslims, small minority of Muslims that are there. Salat time, if you are in plenary, you get up as a Muslim and you go to mosque. You don't need anybody's permission, not even the chief whip's permission. You go and perform your salah. Look at Ismail Wadi. How does he go to mosque? He's got his topi, he's got his... Nobody looks a second time at the man. So you have all those freedoms. That came from the ANC. You go to your airports. You got facilities. Who created those facilities? Not the DA, not anybody else. It was driven by the ANC. Now, you forget all those things suddenly. Your memory becomes short. And you probably, if you have another political party, might say, look, we've monitored the use of the Salah facilities in the airport. It's wasted space out there, not enough people in attendance. And for functional reasons, we're closing it. There. That's going to be the result. The ANC is not going to do that. But you come to a situation where you have another party in the scene. I certainly won't feel comfortable, especially after seeing what the City Council of Cape Town had done in terms of basically painting over a flag which represents the struggle of our people as under an apartheid regime, and our solidarity and identity with oppressed people who are Muslims in Palestine. And our commitment from the ANC, from the beginning, from Nelson Mandela, right from the beginning. And now you allow that to, you do that in the face of that particular history and legacy? No ways. I'm not going to trust my future or the destiny of my children with a party that basically is imperialist and wants to colonize us in a very clever way. That's what's going to happen. There's an attempt to colonize the black people of this country. And if our Muslims don't wake up, that is going to be the reality of tomorrow.
Thank you for that. Before we end, you are 71.
70.
You're 17 of 71.
Soon to be 71.
To 71, inshallah. Allah will give you a long life.
Inshallah.
What has life taught you?
Well, life has taught me that three things importantly, maybe a few more. But firstly, that you are not the creator of your destiny. That your plan, you're the creator of your plans comes from elsewhere. Your taqdeer is determined elsewhere. I never knew where I'm going to be. I never knew that I was going to leave to become a politician. I never knew that I was going to become a minister. It wasn't in my plans of life. It just happened accidentally. And I thank Allah for it. And I thank the people for the support that they provided me during that time. So that would be my first thing. But it doesn't mean that if indeed if your life goes in a particular direction, that you must stop working and assume that everything is going to come, because the Quran says very clearly that you create your own destiny, as it were. You create your own future. So that freedom that you have as a human being is something that you must harness. The second takeaway is all that I've achieved in life would have not been possible but for the women in my life. My wife, who basically looked after my children for more than 25 years while I was away, and carried on with her political work and her own work. And that's an enormous sacrifice. For a woman who's alone, and she was alone, there was nobody else, no extended family out there, looking after the children, seeing them to school, seeing after madrasa, seeing to the extramural, being a speaker and being a chairperson of the government, chairperson of the branch secretary. Enormous. I really think she would deserve a greater credit, and my mom, of course, and all the other women who have provided support for me. Naledi Pandu, Enji Mutseha, wonderful people. And I had just great pleasure in serving under them and with them. So that would be basically acknowledging the role of women in my life. The third is really to be very, very grateful and express your gratitude to all the people who have influenced you in one way. My organization, the ANC, for developing certain political talents which I would otherwise not have acquired. The people who influenced me and almost compelled me to go into parliament and to ensure that I too make a contribution. I thank them, and for the ANC giving me the opportunity. From our current president, Cyril Ramaphosa, he opened many doors in terms of allowing me to raise points and develop that confidence to be able to argue for the ANC when I was still a very young man. That is useful. And the other presidents. I must say Jacob Zuma was good to me personally, very, very good for education. Has been wonderful. Kgalema Motlanthe was quite unique. Thabo Mbeki. So it's many people politically, and then all my friends and people that have supported me. Here's a friend here sitting out here with me. We were in school together. That's 1968, 1969, 1970. 3 years together, best of friends, still there. The only difficulty is I wish I had more courage to wear a beard as long as he has. But alhamdulillah, so that has been great. And perhaps the last thing is really to recognize that whatever limited endowments you have in life, you thank Allah for it, but shouldn't make you arrogant and proud, but should make you humble and grateful. So it's with an expression of gratitude that we basically carry on with our journey in life. We haven't stopped working. We will continue, inshallah, if we have the strength. But to really say, and the last is people see Enver Surty on television, they hear him on radio, they hear him see him in debates, and they might read his books. But I have so many weaknesses. So many weaknesses. That I feel that I don't deserve the accolades, the praise, the support. And I just hope I'm forgiven for all the limitations and any harm that I might have caused anybody.
Ameen, inshallah. Ameen, inshallah. Before we go, the camera is yours for 1 minute. to Channel Islam International listeners, to South African viewers and listeners. You can say anything. You can campaign for the ANC. You can say thank you to your wife. You can say whatever you want to say.
Well,
it's yours.
I have said thank you for my wife already, and indeed I will thank her again for wonderful support, extraordinary support, and she has provided, and to my mom obviously, and my sisters, my siblings, and all the women in my life. There are too many of them. But I would like to say that the community must think about whom they're going to vote for. The ANC has a record of protecting the rights and freedoms of Muslims. It has supported the poor and will continue to do so. It does so in terms of its support grants. And I'll just give you an example in education. To feed 9.2 million children every day, to provide 56 million books free of charge, and to have more than 85% of our children having free education, and to show gradually and incrementally an improvement in the quality of education. This is important. So not everything is bad. There are weaknesses, and indeed they have to be corrected. But to encourage our people to make sure that political life, Muslims, and I stress Muslims, that the political life is not divorced from their mundane activities, and that's very, very critical. And to vote, even if they don't vote for the ANC, I would certainly vote for the ANC, but to be very, very clear and frank about, if they vote for the ANC, to say, look, I'm not happy with this. I wish to express my disappointment in that, and this is how we can correct it, and to make themselves available to improve the future and the destiny of the poorest of the poor in this country. After all, this is what it's all about. It's our commitment to creating a non-racial, non-sexist, equal society, and our commitment to equality, founding value in our constitution: human dignity, equality, and freedom. Now think about the Palestinian struggle, and think about how powerful those three values that underpin our constitution are. Human dignity, because they're being stripped of the dignity in everything that the Zionists are doing. Equality, they've been denied that. It's an apartheid state. And freedom, it's being curtailed in an open concentration camp. So those three values that underpin our constitution are values that we should embrace as Muslims. And inshallah, we have a good future. Not to be afraid, but to say, well, opportunities abound, and not everything is going to go our way. But there's no reason why we shouldn't fight for what is right and what is just and what is true. Thank you.
That was our conversation with Enver Surty. Jazakallah khair for being just amazing and open and frank with us. Jazakallah khair. Shukran to you. Shukran to you.
In Conversation With is proudly sponsored by Africa Cash and Carry, Crown Mines, and shot on location at Cortuba Convention Center.